The trust fund paperwork still had my name on it. But when we pulled into the driveway that morning, my son Bruce told me, "You're not invited to the christening." I thought I had misheard him. My hands were full. The white blanket I'd been sewing for months, soft and neatly folded, and the silver rattle that had been in our family since my grandmother's time. My husband, Billy, stood next to me in his navy blazer, hair combed, shoes polished. We had driven 3 hours to get here, and now we were being told to go home. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It really helps us keep sharing stories like this one. The day Bruce told us we weren't welcome at our granddaughter's christening, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't seem upset. It was steady cold, like he was reading off a line he'd been told to deliver. That somehow made it worse. "Mom, Dad, you're not invited. Please leave." It was as if someone had dumped cold water over me, starting at the back of my neck. Not a word slipped by without me hearing it clear. "Mom, flat, not warm. Dad," like he was pointing out strangers. "You're not invited." There was no hesitation, no fumbling for the right words. He meant them. I looked past him. His wife was sitting in the living room, holding the baby. She didn't turn her head, didn't smile, didn't even glance our way. "This is our day," Bruce said. "We want it simple." As if us standing there, dressed, ready, holding gifts was a problem to be solved. "Please leave," polite on the surface but not kind. It was a dismissal. A message, "You're not wanted here." I couldn't find my voice. I stood still on the front step, holding that blanket, and rattled like they were anchors keeping me from falling over. The blanket was made from the same pattern my mother had used for my own children. The rattle had been polished just the night before. I'd pictured handing them to her, watching her unwrap them, maybe even tearing up. She didn't ask what was in my hands. She didn't say thank you. She didn't look. Across the street, the next-door neighbor came out to get her mail. She paused for just a second, looking toward us, then turned away. Someone carrying a casserole dish walked up the sidewalk toward the house, slowed when they saw us, then slipped inside without a word. We had become a scene, without anyone needing to speak about it. Bruce's face stayed calm. Not angry, not embarrassed, not sad. Just blank. Blank in a way I didn't recognize. Billy was quiet beside me. I saw his jaw shift, that little clench I've known for years. The same one he uses when he's trying to keep something from showing. He had spent hours on the phone, helping Bruce find a good insurance plan for the baby. He'd even paid the first few premiums. No thank you. Not even a mention. I thought about the time Bruce told me, "Don't bother coming to the hospital after the birth. We'll FaceTime you." I told myself he was just tired, just adjusting. I had excused so many things. And now here we were, standing outside his home, in the middle of a street where everyone knew us, being told to leave before we'd even stepped inside. Behind Bruce, I saw movement, one of his wife's friends walking past with a wrapped gift. They glanced at us, then at Bruce, and kept going into the kitchen. I heard a laugh, light and casual, float from inside the house. The door stayed open just long enough for me to smell something baking. I felt a pinch in my chest that went deeper than embarrassment. This wasn't just about today. It was about everything that had been leading here. Billy shifted beside me, like he was ready to turn around. I tightened my grip on the blanket. My throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. I wanted to say something that would make Bruce snap out of it. I wanted to ask him if he remembered the nights we stayed up with him, when he was sick, the times we skipped paying our own bills to cover his. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he stepped back, resting his hand on the door. "We'll talk another time," he said. That was it. No hug. No, "We'll miss you." Just a closing line before he started to push the door shut. Billy nodded once. Not agreement, not understanding, just a way to move things along without making a scene. I followed his lead. We turned away, walked down the front steps we'd helped him rebuild after that big storm 2 years ago, past the flower pots I'd brought from our own yard to brighten his porch. I could feel eyes on us, though I didn't look up to see whose. When we reached the car, I set the blanket and rattle carefully on the back seat, as if they were breakable. My hands felt empty without them, even though they were still there. Billy started the engine. Neither of us said a word as we backed out of the driveway. As we rolled past the corner, I caught one last glimpse of the house in the side mirror. People were gathering in the living room, talking, smiling, holding the baby. We weren't in the picture. We weren't supposed to be. I faced forward and kept my eyes on the road. I wasn't ready to cry. Not yet. We didn't talk as we made our way to the car. The street was lined with vehicles I recognized. Old friends from church, Bruce's coworkers, a couple of neighbors from when he was in high school. Every one of them was here for the same reason we thought we were. I kept my eyes on the ground, watching my shoes hit the pavement. Billy walked beside me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I could feel the tension coming off him, like heat. When we reached the car, he unlocked it without a word. I slid into the passenger seat and buckled in, still holding my purse on my lap like I needed something to hang on to. Billy started the engine, then just sat there for a second, staring out the windshield. His jaw was tight, the way it gets when he's trying not to let his feelings out. Last winter, he'd spent 3 weekends helping Bruce patch and seal his roof after an ice storm. Half the shingles were curling and water had leaked into the attic. Billy climbed up there in the freezing wind, working side by side with him. When the supply store bill came in higher than expected, Billy paid half without a second thought. Bruce hadn't brought it up again. Not a thank you, not even an acknowledgement. We pulled away from the curb, turning left onto the main road. The houses we passed blurred together. My mind wasn't on the streets. It was on the small signs I'd been ignoring for years. The first time I felt the change was when Bruce met his wife. At the start, I was happy for him. She seemed polite, well put together. But the phone calls became less frequent. Visits were shorter. He started saying things like, "Let's keep it simple," when we offered to host holidays. I'd suggest a Sunday dinner, and he'd say, "We'll see," but the day never came. Billy gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Where to?" he asked, but it wasn't really a question. He just didn't want to go home yet. "Drive," I said. So we did. Through the edge of town, past the old school, past the park where Bruce learned to ride his bike. Each landmark seemed heavier than the last. I kept thinking about the baby, our granddaughter. The first time I'd seen her, she was only a few days old. I'd brought over homemade soup and fresh bread. Bruce's wife had thanked me at the door, but I never got to hold the baby. She said she was sleeping and it was best not to wake her. Billy took a right at the gas station and headed toward the highway. We didn't speak. The hum of the tires filled the space where conversation used to be. After about 20 minutes, we passed a diner with a half-empty parking lot. It wasn't fancy, just a squat brick building with a faded sign, and a breakfast all-day banner in the window. Billy slowed down, then turned in without asking. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and pancakes. A waitress pointed us toward a booth by the window. We slid in, and she dropped off 2 menus. Neither of us opened them. Billy wrapped his hands around the coffee mug when it came, staring at the steam. "Do you remember," he said slowly, "when we set up that trust fund for him?" The thought landed in my chest like a weight. Yes, I remembered. It was 10 years ago, after Bruce got his first steady job. We'd wanted to help him build security for the future, money for emergencies, maybe a down payment on a bigger house, or something for the baby if he had one. We put in a good chunk every year. The The plan was that it would transfer fully to him when he turned 40. It's still in our names, I said quietly. Billy nodded. And he doesn't get it without our signatures. We sat with that for a while. Neither of us said the words, but they hung between us anyway. He'd shut us out today, but expected us to keep that door open for him when it came to money. The waitress came back, pen in hand. We both ordered coffee refills and nothing else. I wasn't hungry. Looking out the window, I saw a young couple walk by, holding a baby. The woman smiled down at the child, and the man leaned in to kiss the top of her head. It stung in a way I didn't want to admit. Billy finally broke the silence. We're not making any decisions today. We go home. We think. We don't do this out of anger. I agreed. This wasn't about getting even. It was about seeing things for what they were and deciding where to stand from here on out. We stayed at that booth a long time, watching the light outside shift as the day moved on. When we finally left, the coffee was cold, and my mind was set on one thing. We couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. As we drove home from the diner that afternoon, I stared out the window, and my mind kept pulling me backward. What happened on Bruce's doorstep wasn't sudden. It was just the clearest version of something that had been building for years. I thought about when he was 17. He'd been talking about getting a car for months. We'd saved enough to help him buy a used truck from a neighbor. It wasn't shiny, but it ran well, and Billy had gone over it from bumper to make sure it was safe. The day we handed him the keys, Bruce didn't say much. He just nodded, climbed in, and drove off to a friend's house. I remember standing in the driveway with Billy, telling myself, he's just excited. He'll say thank you later. That thank you never came. Then came college. Move-in day was a long one. We'd packed our truck with boxes, bedding, and groceries. I had cooked for a week straight, so he'd have homemade meals in his freezer. Billy hauled box after box up 3 flights of stairs while Bruce carried his phone in one hand, laughing at messages from his friends. By the time we finished setting up his room, he was already making plans to go out for the night. He hugged us quickly, said, "I'll call you tomorrow," and left us standing there. The call came a week later, not to check in, but to ask if we could deposit more money for books. When he bought his first house, it was the same pattern. The place was older, needed some updates. The hot water heater broke in the first month, and he called Billy in a panic. Billy found a good one on sale, drove over, and spent half a Saturday installing it. Bruce didn't even offer to help carry it in. He stood in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, telling us about a weekend trip he and his friends were planning. I used to explain it away. I told myself he was young, distracted, busy with his own life. I thought he'd grow out of it, that he'd eventually see the effort we put in and appreciate it. I believed the day would come when he'd say, "I know I didn't thank you enough before, but I do now." That day never came. Even when we weren't giving him something big, it was the little things. He'd stop by and eat dinner without asking if we needed help with dishes. We'd offer advice on bills or repairs, and he'd nod without listening, then call later when things went wrong. I can't say there weren't good moments. There were. A few dinners where he stayed and talked, a couple of birthdays where he seemed genuinely happy we were there. But the gaps in between grew longer. Calls became quick check-ins that always circled back to what he needed. "Can you help me with?" became the most common way our conversations started. When he met his wife, the space between us widened. At first, I thought it was just him settling into a new relationship. But invitations to family dinners turned into, "We're busy." Holidays were split in ways that always seemed to cut our time shorter. Sometimes we'd hear about events after they'd happened. I remember one Thanksgiving when we had planned a big meal. I'd set the table, roasted a turkey, made his favorite cranberry salad. That morning he called to say they wouldn't make it. They'd been invited to her cousin's house instead. He sounded rushed, like he was already halfway out the door. I stood there holding the phone, looking at the table I'd spent all morning setting. I told him it was fine, but the truth is, it stung. It's easy to let these moments blur together when you want to keep the peace. I told myself over and over that it was just the season of life he was in. Work, a new marriage, a baby on the way, they all take time. But the truth I didn't want to face was that we were always the ones adjusting, making room, bending to fit into whatever space he allowed. I used to believe that parents are supposed to keep showing up, no matter what. You give, you support, you're there when they need you. And I did that, we both did, without stopping to ask if it was still healthy for us. I thought love meant pushing down the disappointment and hoping for better days. But the christening, that doorstep, stripped away all the excuses. There was no busyness to blame, no misunderstanding. He looked right at us and told us we weren't welcome. That wasn't a missed call or a late thank you. That was a choice. As the miles rolled by on the way home, I knew something had shifted in me. I didn't want to carry years of being an afterthought anymore. I didn't want to pretend that it didn't hurt. I also knew this wasn't about cutting ties in anger. It was about finally seeing the pattern for what it was. I glanced over at Billy. His eyes stayed on the road, but his hands gripped the wheel a little tighter than usual. He felt it too. The years, the effort, the quiet taking. Neither of us said it out loud yet, but we both knew something was going to change. By the time we pulled into the diner's parking lot again, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the hood of the car. We hadn't said much since leaving Cedar Falls earlier. The silence wasn't forced. It was the kind that comes when you both know the other is thinking the same thing. Inside, we went back to the same booth we'd been in earlier that day. The waitress didn't ask if we wanted menus this time. She just brought 2 steaming mugs of coffee. I wrapped my hands around mine and stared at the dark liquid. It was me who spoke first. "We still have control," I said quietly. Billy looked up from his cup, his eyes steady. He knew exactly what I meant. The trust fund. The one we had set up all those years ago to give Bruce a leg up in life. We'd kept it in both our names, with the plan that it would become his in full when he turned 40. Until then, every withdrawal needed our signatures. Billy nodded slowly. "He's counting on it," he said, "and right now, he acts like it's already his." That was true. Over the past couple of years, Bruce had mentioned the trust like it was a given, a safety net he didn't have to earn or think about. It wasn't unusual for him to bring it up casually, like, well, when the trust kicks in, as if it were simply part of his future. I'd never corrected him. I'd never reminded him it was still ours to manage. I took a sip of coffee and let the warmth settle in my chest. "We don't decide anything tonight," I told Billy. "We go home. We pull up the papers. We look at everything." "I'm not doing anything out of spite," Billy said. "This isn't about payback." "I know," I said. "It's about seeing things for what they are and deciding if it's still wise to hand over that kind of money to someone who just told us to leave." We didn't talk about calling Bruce. There didn't seem to be any point. He knew what he said. He knew what it meant. Any call now would only give him a chance to twist it into something smaller, something we should just move past. I glanced out the window. A family of 4 walked by, the parents each holding one of the kids' hands. I felt a pang in my chest. It reminded me of when Bruce was little, when he'd hold both of our hands as we crossed the street. Somewhere between those moments and today, we'd lost our place in his life. Billy tapped his finger lightly on the table. "You think he'd even notice if we changed it?" "Oh, he'd notice," I said. "Maybe not right away, but he would." We both knew we weren't talking about just money. This was about trust, the kind you can't deposit in a bank. The kind we'd been handing over without conditions for years. The waitress came by to top off our cups. We thanked her, then fell quiet again. Part of me wanted to act right then, to drive straight to our lawyer's office and make the changes before I lost my nerve. But another part of me knew rushing wouldn't serve us. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to look at every document, every clause, so there would be no room for regret later. When we finally stood to leave, I tucked a few dollars under my mug for the tip. Billy held the door open, and the cool air met us on the sidewalk. Back in the car, the road ahead felt longer than the one we'd driven earlier. But I knew one thing for certain: we weren't going back to pretending everything was fine. We drove home without the radio on. Both of us were replaying the same scene. The doorstep, the words, the look on his face. And both of us were thinking about the folder in our desk drawer where the trust papers were waiting. Whatever we decided, it would be on our terms this time. When we got home, I went straight to the desk in the corner of the living room. Billy took off his jacket, hung it by the door, and joined me without a word. We both knew what we were here for. The bottom drawer was heavy with folders we'd been adding to for years: tax returns, bank statements, letters from the lawyer. I pulled them all out and spread them across the table. Billy plugged in the small desk lamp so we could see clearly. The first folder I opened was the trust paperwork. The original agreement was dated 10 years ago, neat signatures at the bottom. We had started it with the idea that it would give Bruce stability. It was supposed to be a gift, not a guarantee. But reading the clauses now, I saw how much control we still had over it, and how little he seemed to realize that. I set the trust papers aside and opened another folder marked Accounts. Inside were bank statements, and right there in the most recent one, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. Bruce had added his wife's name to one of the small savings accounts we'd opened together for emergencies. He never mentioned it. The balance wasn't large, but that wasn't the point. It was the assumption. Billy leaned over my shoulder. "Did you know about this?" "No," I said, and if he needed to do it, he could have asked. Next, I opened my email on the old laptop. I typed Bruce's name in the search bar and scrolled. There they were, years of short, clipped messages. Most didn't start with, "Hi, Mom," or "How are you?" They started with things like, "Can you cover this?" followed by an attached bill. "Need to transfer for the car insurance by Friday. Can you send the payment directly to the company?" "No, please." "No, thank you." Just instructions, as if it were my job to keep things running in the background. I clicked on an old folder labeled Photos and found another reminder of how far we'd been pushed out. There were pictures from his wife's baby shower, decorations, smiling faces, gift bags, all taken from a social media post I'd been sent by a friend. We hadn't been invited. Next came Thanksgiving from 2 years ago. They'd hosted at their house. I remember getting a text that morning saying, "We're doing something small this year, just us." Later that night, a neighbor told me they'd seen cars lined up along Bruce's street and people going in with pies and casseroles. I hadn't wanted to believe it, but here in the photos were his in-laws, friends, even a few of his old classmates. Not us. Billy had moved on to another stack of papers. "Look at this," he said, tapping a printout. It was from a shared account we had helped him open to pay off a credit card. He'd been making the payments, but we were still listed as co-owners. You know what that means? Billy said, if he misses a payment, it hits our credit, not just his. I sat back in my chair. It was all here, the pattern, the taking, the quiet rewriting of the rules without telling us. "This isn't just about the trust," I said. "It's about the way he's come to see us. Like we're an obligation he has to tolerate in exchange for the help." Billy nodded. "I think he believes we owe him this, all of it." I closed the laptop and looked at the pile in front of us, the statements, the printed emails, the photos. It was like holding years of evidence in my hands, proof of what we'd been feeling but hadn't wanted to face. Enough is enough, I said. The words came out steady, not loud, but final. Billy didn't argue. He just leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms the way he does when he's already made up his mind. We didn't decide that night exactly what step we'd take next, but we both knew something was going to change. And this time, it wouldn't be us bending to fit into whatever space Bruce decided to leave for us. Enough is enough. If you agree that respect matters more than titles like parent or child, click that subscribe button. And if you think I'm wrong, explain why in the comments. The next morning, my phone buzzed just after 8. Bruce's name lit up the screen. For a second, I thought maybe he was calling to talk about what happened at the door, maybe even to apologize. I answered. "Hey," he said, "I just checked the account. The transfer from the trust didn't go through this month. Did you forget?" Not a word about the christening, not a question about how we were, just straight to the money. "I didn't forget," I said. There was a pause. "So, is there a problem?" "We'll talk about it later," I told him. My voice was calm, but I made sure the sentence didn't invite any more questions. He let out a short breath, the kind people do when they're holding back frustration. "All right," he said. "Later." Then the line went dead. By noon, I had 2 missed calls from him. By 2 o'clock, there were 4. Then his wife started calling. I didn't answer any of them. Around dinner time, my phone pinged again. This time a text from his wife. "Bruce says you haven't been answering. Is something going on? We need to get the trust payment sorted." I set the phone face down on the table. Billy was across from me, reading the paper. "Who's that?" he asked. "Her," I said. Same question, different voice. He didn't respond, just went back to the paper. The next morning, my phone started buzzing again before I'd even poured coffee. Bruce called once, then again. Then came a text. "Mom, this is important. We've got bills due." By midday, it wasn't just them. My sister-in-law texted, "I heard you're upset about the christening. That's no reason to punish the baby. Punish the baby." I read the words twice. I couldn't decide if I wanted to laugh or shake my head. This wasn't about the baby. It wasn't even about the christening anymore. This was about the years of giving without limits, and how, for Bruce, it had become routine. Billy's phone started buzzing too. He glanced at the screen and let it ring. "His in-laws," he said flatly. "I'm not answering either." Then came a group text from some of the extended family. "We heard what happened. You two should work it out for the sake of the baby. She needs grandparents in her life." I stared at the message. Not one of them asked what Bruce had said to us. Not one of them wanted the whole story. They just decided we were the ones making a scene. That evening, Bruce left a voicemail. "I don't know what you're doing," he said, "but this needs to stop. It's not fair to hold money over our heads. Money, not love, not time, not the relationship. Money." I played the message once more, then deleted it. Billy looked at me. He's making it pretty clear what matters most right now. "Yes," I said, "and it's not us." We sat there a long while, without saying much else. Every buzz of the phone felt like another reminder of how far apart we'd drifted, not just in miles, but in priorities. I knew then that our next step wasn't just going to be about the trust. It was going to be about drawing a line we should have drawn a long time ago. 2 days later, Billy came into the kitchen while I was rinsing out the coffee pot. He had his phone in his hand. "I found someone," he said. "Who?" "A lawyer. Not the one we've used before. Someone new. No connection to Bruce or anyone we know." I dried my hands. "When can we see them?" "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. We didn't talk much more about it that night. The decision felt too solid to pick apart. The next morning, we got in the car early and drove across town to an office building I'd never been in before. The law office was on the second floor, small but neat. The lawyer, a woman named Carla, shook our hands and invited us to sit. She had a quiet confidence about her, the kind that comes from hearing a lot of family stories that didn't have neat endings. "What can I help you with?" she asked. Billy glanced at me, and I began. "We have a trust fund in our names for our son. He's not 40 yet, so he can't access it without us. We want to change it. We want joint trustee approval for every withdrawal from here on out." She nodded and started writing. "Has he been accessing it regularly?" "Yes," I said. "It was meant for emergencies, for his future, but he's been treating it like extra income. And after what's happened recently, we don't feel comfortable continuing without safeguards." Billy added, "We also want to update our will. Right now, he's our only beneficiary. That's going to change." Carla didn't flinch. "All right, who do you want to include?" We named 2 nieces, both responsible, both close to us over the years. We also named a local scholarship fund we'd donated to before. The rest would go to a few charities we cared about. As she typed, I let my mind drift for just a moment. I could still see Bruce the day he was born. I'd been so tired, but when they placed him in my arms, I thought I'd never feel anything so strong. His tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb, and I knew I'd spend my life doing whatever I could to protect him. I shook off the memory and brought myself back to the table. The boy from that day was not the man who had told us to leave his doorstep without hesitation. Carla printed the first set of documents for us to review. The language was straightforward. No funds could be withdrawn from the trust without signatures from both trustees. Any attempt to bypass would trigger an automatic freeze. "This protects you," she explained. "It also makes clear that this money is not an entitlement. It's yours until you say otherwise." We signed. Then came the updated will. Bruce's name was still there, but now it was one among several, with smaller portions attached. The bulk was split between the nieces and the charities. When we were done, Carla gathered the papers into a neat stack. "These changes are effective immediately. If anyone asks why, you don't have to explain. This is your right." The drive home was quiet. I thought I might feel guilty, but I didn't. I felt steady. The trust was locked down. The will was balanced. Our intentions were in writing, not just floating in conversations we might have later. We pulled into the driveway, and Billy turned off the engine. "That's one thing done," he said. "One big thing," I replied. As we walked into the house, I felt something lift in me. For the first time in years, we'd made a decision that wasn't about keeping the peace with Bruce. It was about protecting ourselves, our work, and our future. For the first time in years, we made a decision that wasn't about keeping the peace. If you believe that moment matters, subscribe now so you don't miss the rest of this journey. If not, go ahead and tell me why you'd let it go. I'm listening. It didn't take long for the news to reach Bruce. 3 days after we left Carla's office, I got a text from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Did you see what your daughter-in-law posted on Facebook?" I opened the screenshot she sent. There it was in bold letters. "Some people don't know how to love unconditionally. Family isn't supposed to keep score." No names, but she didn't need to write them. Anyone who knew us would know exactly who she meant. Within an hour, my phone started lighting up. A message from an old coworker. "Is it true you cut Bruce off?" A cousin called, her voice sharp. "Why would you take money from your own son? That's cruel." "I didn't take anything from him." I said. "You know what I mean?" She replied. "This isn't right. You're still his parents. You should be helping him. Helping him. Always helping him." I didn't bother explaining. The next call came from another cousin, but her tone was different. Why air dirty laundry by saying nothing? Everyone's filling in the blanks. If you won't tell your side, people will just assume the worst. I'm not putting our business online. I said, well, she said, then don't be surprised when the story isn't in your favor. By that afternoon, I'd stopped answering calls. The ones that came through went to voicemail. Most were some version of the same thing, urging me to make peace or be the bigger person, none of them asking what had actually happened on that doorstep. Late that night, I checked my email. Among the noise, there was a short note from an old friend at church. I've seen how much you've done for him over the years. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. Protect your peace. I read it twice. It was the first bit of understanding I'd felt since all this started. Billy was sitting in his chair with the TV on low when I handed him the note. He read it and nodded once. She gets it. We didn't need to talk much more. Instead, we started working quietly. The trust was already locked, but there were still loose ends, smaller accounts we were connected to, automatic payments we'd set up years ago. We began closing them one by one. There was a credit card we'd co-signed for when Bruce was in his 20s, still open even though it hadn't been used in years. We called and closed it. There was the cell phone plan we'd added him to years back when he couldn't afford his own. I'd been paying for his line without thinking about it. I called the company and had his number removed. We even found an old insurance policy with his name still listed under ours. That one came off too. We didn't announce any of it. There were no warnings, no explanations. Just the slow removal of every tie that left us responsible for his choices. Every step felt like setting down a bag I'd been carrying for too long. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindictive. I just felt lighter. The calls and messages didn't stop, but they changed. Bruce's in-laws tried next. His mother-in-law left a voicemail saying she didn't understand why we were hurting the whole family over one disagreement. I didn't call back. Bruce himself didn't contact me directly for a while. Maybe he thought the posts and the pressure from others would wear us down. Maybe he thought we'd quietly undo the changes. He didn't realize that we weren't moving backward this time. By the end of that week, we'd closed every account we'd ever shared with him. We'd taken our names off anything that could be used without our permission. The only thing left was the trust, and that was now protected. I knew some people would keep seeing us as the villains. It didn't matter. The people who mattered most in this were me and Billy, and for the first time in a long time, we were on the same page about what needed to be done. A few weeks passed before we heard from Bruce directly. It came in a thick white envelope delivered to our front door. Inside was a formal letter from a lawyer we didn't know, requesting mediation to restore access to funds and resolve the current dispute. The words made it sound like this was some business disagreement between strangers, not something between a son and his parents. There was no mention of the christening, no mention of the way we'd been told to leave. Just a clear focus on the money. I placed the letter on the kitchen table and sat for a moment. Billy walked in, read the first few lines over my shoulder, and shook his head. Guess we have our answer about priorities, he said. Later that afternoon, I went into the study and opened the drawer where the last shared account information was kept. It was the smallest of the accounts we had once opened for him, still active out of habit. I picked up the phone, called the bank, and closed it. The balance was transferred into our own savings. When the papers came in the mail a few days later confirming it was done, I put them in a new folder I'd labeled in black marker, What We Learned. Inside, I placed copies of the trust changes, the updated will, and now this last account closure. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a record of the moment we stopped letting someone else's choices keep us trapped. One morning not long after, I was standing at the stove flipping pancakes. Billy was reading the paper at the table. We talked about the weather, about the new fence the neighbor was putting up, and about what groceries we needed. We didn't mention Bruce. Not once. It was the first breakfast in months where his name didn't come up, and I realized something. I didn't miss the conversation. I didn't feel the usual weight of wondering if we should call or if we should be doing something to fix things. I didn't feel the need to explain or justify anything to anyone. I no longer needed Bruce's understanding to feel whole. I could love my son and still protect myself from him. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and thought about the day on his doorstep. I thought about how far we'd come since then, and how different I felt now compared to that morning. Back then, I was frozen, unsure of what to do. Now, I knew exactly where I stood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. Let the silence hold the truth. So I'll ask you, what would you have done? Is there a point where silence says more than words ever could? If this story made you think, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you believe in setting healthy boundaries, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over performance. And when you do, you'll be surprised how much lighter life feels.